So yes, so we today it's module two, Horizon Europe project lifecycle, and I'm going to be discussing about the initiation phase and planning phase. So in more concrete terms, this is sort of the agenda that I hope to get through during the next hour and a quarter plus. So in terms of the initiation phase, I'm going to be talking very pragmatically, how do you register to something called the EU Funding and Tenders portal? I'm going to give some advice about how you can go about identifying Horizon Europe calls for proposals. I'm going to say some words about trying to understand the call conditions. We already spoke in the last module about developing a project charter, but I'll briefly go back to recap on that. And then I'll say some words about general advice about how to build a consortium, what to consider, how to present it. Then in the sort of second part of the training, which is actually longer, the planning phase. In essence, this planning phase is, when you step back and think about it in terms of Horizon Europe, all the planning, you pretty much have to capture that in your proposal that you're writing. So in essence, the planning phase is exactly that. It's about preparing the proposal. So I'll be talking about the standard application forms that exist for Horizon Europe. When you prepare a proposal, there's a part A and a part B. The part B is a technical proposal. It's the hardest part, and that's broken into three sections. So I'll be talking about section 1, scientific excellence, section 2, impact, section 3, implementation. And then I'll move on to talk about resource allocation, which is things like personnel, person months, financials, budgets. I'll then move on to talk briefly a bit about how to go about doing a proposal submission, what proposal evaluation involves, some brief words about grant agreement preparation if you're successful with your proposal, and then finally I'll say some words about consortium agreements, and at the very end I'll give the latest homework for those of you who are working towards getting a certificate on EU project management. Before I go on to the next slide, I want to draw your attention to these sort of arrow figures, the two on the right. So the one that shows initiation phase and planning phase. What I'm about to say may sound a little pedantic for some of you, for others maybe it'll give you a sense of relief. But what I realized, I had a similar kind of arrow figure in my last presentation in December in module 1. The only difference was when you transfer from one phase to the other, I had a simple sort of straight line. Whereas here, they're sort of hatched. Now, as I say, I stress this is perhaps being pedantic, but what I'm trying to emphasize here actually with these latest arrows is to say, look, these phases, initiation phase, planning phase, it's not like you transfer from one phase to the other from one day to the next. It's a bit messy. There's overlap in tasks, and this is perfectly normal. And it's not only say there's an overlap in tasks between the initiation phase and planning phase, but also later on when if you're successful and you have a project and you're executing it, when you're getting towards the end of that project, you already need to think about the closing phase and the activities there. So as I say, maybe a slightly pedantic point, but for myself, thinking back many years ago, working in engineering and also dealing with project management, I used to get a bit het up, a bit worried about, oh, have we really finished that phase? Can we really start this new phase? Of course you can. These things overlap. Okay, well, let's get moving on to initiation phase. So the first thing I said was that I better give some advice to those of you who are not yet registered for this thing called the EU Funding and Tenders portal. I'm sure probably most of you, if not all of you, are, but for those of you who aren't, the EU Funding and Tenders portal is the website with all the details about calls for proposals, calls for tenders. if you're going to be using that for doing your own proposals and tenders, you need to be registered as a user. The way you can go about doing that is in the top left-hand corner, there's the QR code that will take you to this website. Assuming you get to this web page, click on the button sign in at the top right-hand corner, and then basically follow the instructions for registering as a new user. I strongly recommend that if you haven't done this before, that you do this, because not only does it allow you to access, get information about the calls and so forth, also you might be interested at some point in registering as an evaluator yourself. So for that purpose, I believe you also need to be registered. Okay. Let's move now. Now talk about how to go about identifying calls for proposals. So, a quick reminder: Horizon Europe has this structure. It started in 2021. It goes on to 2027. It's got this huge budget of 95.5 billion euros. In broad terms, this huge program is broken down into different components, and as you see in this figure, there's these three columns, these three pillars: pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3. And at the bottom, you have this horizontal sub-program called widening. So very briefly, pillar 1 deals with excellent science. It covers some of the following funding schemes from the European Research Council. So this will be special individual grants for individuals, starter grants, consolidated grants, advanced grants. It also covers Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which includes things such as doctoral networks. Moving on to pillar 2, global challenges. So what you'll see is there's these 6 clusters spanning everything from health through to food, via civil security and digital. This is the area of the program where, yes, you have these 6 clusters, these thematics, and they tend to be very they're sort of top-down driven in a sense. The commission with experts defines specific needs, research priorities, challenges that society faces, and uses that as a means to launch calls for proposals. Then in the last pillar 3, we have the European Innovation Council, European Innovation Ecosystems, and European Institute of Innovation and Technology. I'm sure for some of you, you'll probably be familiar with the European Innovation Council. One of the schemes they run is called the Pathfinder Open Scheme. This is for very advanced new technologies. It's a bottom-up driven type of scheme with a call once a year. And yes, at the bottom we see widening, the widening scheme, which is open to widening countries, which includes Hungary, other Central and Eastern European countries, and there are a number of countries associated to Horizon Europe, but who are outside of Europe. Now, of course, if there's a particular program, sub-program you're interested in, you need to download what is called the work program for that area. So how can you go about doing that? So this slide here, the QR code bang in the middle of the slide, that QR code will take you to precisely the web page of the European Commission, where they have the official Horizon Europe work programs. So this is the place to go, where if you click on the menu on the left where it says view available work programs, this is where you need to go to make sure you have the current work program. Now, assuming, and for example, if you have a particular interest in Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, this is where you'd find the work program covering 2023 to 2025. Now, oops, gone a bit too far. Let's assume you've downloaded the work program. These work programs, as I say, are accessible from that website. You get them as a PDF file. It might be a document of several hundred pages. If you're not already familiar with a particular work program, the thing to do, I would perhaps say, is look at the table of contents to get an overview. and or perhaps do a keyword search. Certainly for the work programs for Pillar 2, which cover those 6 clusters, some of those work programs, like I think the ICT one, it's literally hundreds of pages. I advise people, do a keyword search on subjects, topics that are interest to you. That may be a quick way to identify a call of interest to yourself. Now, assuming you find a call, you're going to need to check things like, what are the conditions of the call? Probably perhaps first and foremost, when is the call deadline? What is the budget for the call? What's the EU contribution, the number of euros they're prepared to offer per proposal? You'll also need to read very carefully in the call text a section called the expected outcome and the scope. Now, still on this theme about how to identify Horizon Europe calls. So downloading the work programs is one route. The other route is, in fact, through the EU Funding and Tenders portal, which by now, if you hadn't already been, you'll be registered to. So if you click on, if you take the QR code in the top left, that will take you to a particular page within the EU Funding and Tenders portal where you can search for proposals and also for tenders. So, and yeah, this is something sort of, in a sense, kind of in parallel to having the work programs. The difference here is that whereas the work program may give details about calls 1 or 2 years away, with the Funding and Tenders portal, it tends to be perhaps closer to by the time they actually publish it on the website here, it tends to be pretty close to the actual opening of the call, or maybe just at the point when the call gets opened. But I think the value of this EU Funding and Tenders portal is, I'm talking a lot about Horizon Europe, but this Funding and Tenders portal can make you aware about other funding schemes from the EU. So anyway, this is another source. Moving on, another valuable source of information are what are called national contact points, or NCPs. So all EU member states, plus countries associated to Horizon Europe, such as, say, Georgia, Ukraine, Morocco, and others, they will have experts in their country who are very familiar with these Horizon Europe programs, Maria Skłodowska-Curie actions, European Innovation Council, Pathfinder, and they'll have roughly speaking, they'll have a national contact point for each of the different sub-programs. Sometimes they may have even multiple national contact points. With this particular page I'm showing you here, which you can access through the QR code, this takes you directly to the list of national contact points for Hungary. Now, because of the size of my screen, I'm only showing, say, the first 3 names that are there, but in fact, there are 13 people listed. Now, I encourage you, if working with the Horizon Europe program is a medium to long-term thing for you, I strongly encourage you to develop contacts and to get to know your national contact points, because they'll be able to give you lots of information that's not necessarily in the work program. They'll also probably have access to draft copies of future work programs. And this can be very useful if they are able to share that sort of information with you. They can give you heads up about interesting calls. Also, the national contact points can help you perhaps to identify additional consortium partners, because they themselves will have contact with other national contact points from other countries. So all in all, if you don't already have relations with your NCPs, certainly think about contacting them. Then finally, one last sort of suggestion about identifying calls. So I mentioned already on the previous slide, I said, oh, draft work programs. For sort of proposal writers and people working in universities very active in with these schemes, this wording, draft work programs, it's something that gets people excited. They always want to have the latest information, to have the biggest advance notice of calls coming up, so that of course they can prepare for prepare consortium calls for proposals. Now, some people have, I can't say I personally do, but some people have very good contacts and they're able to get these draft work programs seemingly easier. For those of us like myself who don't have such good contacts, where can we go? Well, one place is this website, Science Business. The QR code on the left will take you there. This is a very interesting website which publishes a lot of information about the EU, and because it's Science Business, you can imagine it talks a lot about Horizon Europe and future work programs. Anyway, on this particular web page, they have copies of the latest draft work programs for not necessarily all, but many of the Horizon Europe schemes. Now, one thing to also add, though, be careful. I mean, these are drafts. So the first one I see there, health, it was published in December 2024. Because this health work program is probably imminent in having the finalized version published, probably this draft version for December is probably very, very close to the finalized version. But be careful, there are always chances for changes and so on and so forth. So always remember to go back, look at the drafts, get a bit of a heads up what's coming up, but make sure when you're actually coming down to the nitty-gritty details of preparing a proposal that you've got the finalized formal one issued by the Commission. Okay, I think that's enough about sort of identifying calls. Let's talk a bit about understanding call conditions. I'm going to start off by explaining a few definitions, a few terms. Again, I apologize for those of you who are already familiar with Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020. You'll have heard all this before, but for those of you who aren't, let me start by first of all going through the 3 bullet points at the bottom. So you'll see these acronyms: RIA, IA, CSA. RIA is an acronym for Research and Innovation Action. This is a type of funding that's provided by the European Commission in Horizon Europe for collaborative projects, which are sort of focused on upstream of a commercial product or service, in brackets, technology readiness levels 2 to 6. I'll explain what these TRL levels mean in the following slide. These research and innovation actions, they enable exploration of new technologies, methods, products, or improvement of existing ones. Innovation actions, which, or IAs for short, these are also collaborative projects funding research activities. The difference is, though, that they're funding activities much closer to the commercialization of the product or service, and hence they have technology readiness levels higher, of the order of 6 to 8. And then finally, CSAs, which stand for Coordination Support Actions. These don't fund research, they're not supposed to directly fund research itself. It's more about sort of funding the activities, the environment to support the research. So here the text talks about improving cooperation to strengthen the European research area, including standardization, dissemination, awareness raising, communication, networking, policy dialogues, mutual learning, or studies. Incidentally, this project Quest, which Dora and I have, which with your university, ELTA, this is funded as a coordination support action. So look, that's a little bit about those three different types of projects. Let's now go to the table above. The table above is there to help explain how the funding works for these three different types of projects. So, in fact, for research and innovation actions, I'm reading the first row in the table, research and innovation actions and coordination support actions. The funding is essentially the same. And I'll step through each of the different columns. So it starts up in this table, it's all giving an example where you have a project with a notional 100 euros of direct costs. So direct costs are the costs associated with any kind of activity or material that directly supports your project. Most of the time, direct costs are personnel costs, costs of paying for researchers to do things for the projects. But direct costs can also be, for example, the purchase of research consumables because they're doing something in the laboratory. It can be also related to perhaps the purchase of new equipment for the projects. It can be travel costs so that researchers can go to consortium meetings, and so on and so forth. But at any rate, if you have a project, for every one with these two, research and innovation actions, coordination support actions, for every 100 euros of direct costs, the Commission recognises that all organisations, they have overheads. They have to pay for buildings, they have to pay for support staff. Oh, but to try and calculate these overheads, it gets very, very complicated. You know what? To make life simple, we're just going to say, look, for every 100 euros of direct costs, here's 25 euros to help cover your overheads, and we'll call those indirect costs. So look, add the two together, direct costs plus indirect costs, you get a total cost of 125. For both of these support actions, the funding rate is 100. So that means for every 125 euros of total costs, you will be reimbursed with a grant of 125 euros. All quite straightforward so far. Now we move on to innovation actions. Innovation actions are the ones where it's a little bit more complicated. Here you'll see that there's like two rows in the table. There's what they call the regular rates, and then the row below it talks about rate for non-profit organizations. Where it says regular rate, basically say to yourself, this is the rate for private companies. In the row below where it says rate for non-profit organizations, you can basically say, look, this is the rate for public organizations. And yes, other non-profit organizations, charities, for example, or NGOs. If we go to the regular rate, the one for private companies, okay, we have an innovation action. They've got 100 euros of direct costs. They're given 25 euros for their indirect costs, gives total costs 125. Here, though, the Commission says, this project, it's much closer to commercialization, this product or service you're developing. Therefore, the risk is lower. We just want to give you enough grant basically to stimulate you and encourage you to do this activity because we think it's good. Therefore, we're going to give you a funding rate of 70%. Now, this funding rate of 70%, it's applied to the total cost. And that's why for every, say, 100 euros of direct costs in such a project, if you do the maths and work it through, you'll end up with a grant of 87.50 euros. For innovation actions for the non-profit, it's rather like with the research and innovation actions and coordination and support actions. Basically, the Commission funds at 100%. So for every 100 euros of direct costs, do the simple math, you end up with a grant of 125 euros. Okay, I think that's more than enough about research innovation actions, and coordination support actions for now. Let me move on and talk a little bit about this thing called technology readiness levels. So in this slide, you see this column with sort of 9 different levels. In essence, technology readiness levels this sort of categorization allows the commission, researchers, companies to sort of talk about at what stage a technology is in terms of its development. If you look at this column, if you talked about a technology being at technology readiness level 1, you're saying it's really at the very, very start of any kind of development. In fact, it's just the basic principles have been observed. As this technology matures, you get more and more development. You perhaps, have an experimental proof of concept. You do something validated in the lab. Later on, you test it in an environment, and so on and so forth. And eventually, you get to the point where you actually get ready to commercialize it. As you can imagine, you progress through these TRL levels, and so a moment ago in the previous slide, we talked about research and innovation actions and innovation actions. In very broad terms, you always have to check the cool conditions, but for research and innovation actions, during the course of a 3 or 4 year project, often what you're seeing is at the start of the project, this technology that's been developed is, say, at TRL level 2. By the end of the project, it will be typically at TRL level 4. On the other hand, if it's an innovation action, where it's all about further developing a technology which is much closer to commercialization, oftentimes the cool text will say, look, at the start of your project, you need to be at, say, TRL level 6, but by the end of the project, we're expecting it to be at TRL level 8. These numbers I'm mentioning here, these are very general. You always have to look at the cool text. There are always occasions where there are exceptions to what I just said. So, still on this topic about understanding cool conditions. So, what I'm showing here very briefly on this slide is some of the cool texts for a cool that appeared in 2023 in the Horizon under Pillar 2, Cluster 4. This is the cluster dealing with sort of industry ICT. Buried in this very thick work program with Lord knows how many different calls, there was this particular call with this particular identifier, Horizon Cluster 4 2023 Digital Emerging 01050. That was the call identifier. And it had the title Next Generation Quantum Sensing Metrology Technologies. I picked this one somewhat randomly, but also because the Quest project is in essence dealing with quantum technology. So I thought there's some degree of overlap. Regardless, I could have also been bringing up a call about health or about food. What I'm saying now is applicable to all. When you look at the call text, you'll see the text is broken up into these 3 sections. It'll be about specific conditions, expected outcome, and scope. And you're going to need to read those very, very thoroughly. I only show a fraction of the information here for this particular call, but nevertheless, under specific conditions, it will say things like what's the expected EU contribution per project. For research and innovation action, that could be something like 4 to 6 million euros. It'll give the indicative budget for the call. Maybe the Commission is looking to fund 2, 3, who knows how many projects, but you'll see the total available budget available. It'll tell you the type of action. I've put here research and innovation action, or CSA. In fact, I took a bit of a liberty here. In fact, for this particular call, it was just for research and innovation action. But the point I'm trying to make is, check carefully what type of action it is. You also need to look at the eligibility conditions. In this particular case, it might say, is a call limited to member states because it's a sensitive technology? Or is a call open to associated countries, OECD and Mercosur countries? You need to check that. Technology readiness levels, we just spoke about that a moment ago. But in specific conditions, there'll also be some information about legal and financial setup. In the section expected outcome, there'll typically be several paragraphs of a text identifying the specific expected outcomes for the projects that are going to be funded. So this is an especially important part of text that you're going to need to read and probably print out. Likewise, the section scope, typically this will be maybe a page or more of extensive text describing the scope of the call, describing perhaps the types of activities, the types of technologies that they are expecting to fund. So making sure that your project is aligned with EU priorities. So on this slide, it's talking about project charter. This is something we already talked about in module 1. So I'll go over this rather briefly, but if we take the case of that cool text on the previous slide talking about quantum sensing, what might a project charter, a project abstract, in other words, perhaps look like for such a call? So this is something I prepared fairly quickly myself here. This might be what your project title looks like. This might be what the specific project objectives are that align with, say, the described outcomes of the call. These are the kind of stakeholders that you're going to need to be thinking about, who in some way or other you're going to be able to need to either involve or reach through dissemination, communication, exploitation. These are some of the expected deliverables that might come out for such a project. And then lastly, preliminary timing. These are some of perhaps the key timings, milestones for such a project. Project charter, as we said before in module 1, this is a good thing to have to then be able to share with your consortium partners or potential consortium partners at the initiation phase, where you're trying to get a consortium together, you're trying to get this proposal off the ground. Now, if it's all fine and good saying, look, go away and prepare a project charter, some of us find it easier to do than others. I'll be honest with you, I don't find necessarily that easy. I find the whole writing process, I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people, it's often difficult to get started. Once you get started and you get into it, then it gets relatively easy. But it's the getting started that's the hard part. Now, on this slide here, I've just put down a few bullet points of things which help me a bit to try to focus. So what do? Well, given my age and that I'm not quite so digital technology enabled as, say, the younger generation, I still tend to live rather in this sort of analog world. So I like to print out the key pages from the work program. This is something I regularly do. I print out those pages, I have them on my desk, I start highlighting keywords, circling words, underlining words. I have it nearby on my desk. It's just so that, it helps to keep it top of my awareness, or I might have it on the wall nearby in front of me to sort of also capture my attention. Other things that I do are in the call text, these sections, expected outcome and scope, which you need to make sure that your proposal addresses. Quite often I find in the work program there are these large paragraphs of text, slabs of text I call them, and I find them hard to read. So what I often do is I copy and paste those large passages of text into a Word document, or rather into like a table within a Word document, and I start to break up the paragraph into sets of sentences which are somehow linked together. And this also I find helps to somehow break up the task, at least in my mind, as what needs to be done. The other things I do is, I already start sharing the call text with experienced colleagues and potential consortium partners to try to get them excited, get them interested, get their ideas. I might organize some sort of brainstorming on my own or together with others. In my case, I really like to use a whiteboard. I have one several in my office, in fact. In my case, I find whiteboards are nice because it's so easy to slap something on, wipe it away, improve a figure, whatever. For others of you, you might prefer PowerPoint or some other type of app. Yeah, I do my best to engage key partners, arrange an online meeting with a core of partners to talk about the call text, to present this this project charter, to already try to get them discussing about potential work packages. And yeah, these are things that I try to do that somehow help to hopefully get me past this initial hurdle of preparing a proposal. So moving on, another obviously critical thing, of course, with projects, proposals, is you need to build up a consortium. What bits of advice to give there? Well, obvious one, check carefully the call text to identify the minimum consortium requirements. Usually, but not always, usually it'll say something like at least 3 independent legal entities from 3 different member states or associated countries. This is the bare minimum. Usually you need to have considerably more partners. People often ask me, well, how many partners is a right number? The honest answer would be for me to say, well, how long is a piece of string? But failing that, I say, well, look, if you're dealing with a research and innovation action and an innovation action with a budget of 3 to 6 million euros, you're going to be looking at least 5 to 10 partners, quite possibly more. But it also gets into the issues of, well, bigger doesn't necessarily mean better. The larger your consortium you have, the harder it becomes for the coordinator to manage, the more headaches you're going to probably encounter with dealing with administrations from different universities and different companies. So, there's a trade-off. There's a sort of, if you like, a Goldilocks number, not too many, not too few. Certainly at the start when you're creating a consortium, you need to have some sort of critical mass to begin with. Say, again, if it's research and innovation action, trying to get at least sort of 5 partners together who you can have this online meeting with. You need to identify who's going to be the proposal coordinator and who will be the lead proposal writer. Usually they're the same, one and the same person, but not always. You can have situations where a classic one would be, say, an innovation action where perhaps you feel it's best that the coordinator is a company, that somehow this will help to convey that there's serious commercial interest in this project and that somehow the commercial partners are leading this activity. Okay, fine, but maybe that company, they don't really have the necessary skills to write a competitive proposal, so it ends up perhaps being one of the academic partners. It all depends. This is something you need to clarify early on. Yeah, with this critical mass, organize, if you can, face-to-face with a whiteboard, but of course these days we're mainly dealing with things online. If you're doing it online, it's good to have at least one person there who's very nimble and quick at editing Microsoft PowerPoint slides or equivalent type of slides, so that during this online meeting you can have interactive discussions, you can update work packages, figures, so on and so forth. Still on the subject about consortium and some sort of general pieces of advice, things to consider. So on this slide you see 2 figures. The one on the left is a very basic value chain, we call it. The figure on the right is a geographic map. these two figures appeared in two very different proposals. So the one on the left, this was a research and innovation action I had some years ago that was all about developing organic light emitting diodes for micro displays. Now, in that consortium, we had a mixture of, we had two companies. We had a very large one, Merck, and then we had this very, this small French SME, MOD, specialized in micro displays. What we wanted to convey simply to the evaluators, but also to sort of reassure ourselves, was to say, look, in the development of these micro displays, we're going to have to go through these stages of developing materials, developing a stack, developing the displays themselves. And look, with our consortium, we cover all those different areas. Not only that, but we make sure that we've got a private company that's in each of those phases, because it's the private company that will be able to exploit the any intellectual property, any innovations coming out of the project. So that's what we did with this sort of simple figure. That's what helped to convey it. This is a very, very basic value chain sort of figure we're showing here, but that can be easily adapted for other types of technology based on systems and subsystems. The figure on the right, this is a completely different project. This was a coordination and support action, which is all about providing support to organizations in Central and Eastern Europe in the fields of nanotechnologies, materials, and production. And specifically, it was a coordination support action that I was coordinating that finished just over a year ago. It was called Fit for NMP. And so our objective was to try to increase the participation of organizations from Central and Eastern Europe in the parts of Horizon Europe dealing with NMP, nanotechnology, materials, and production. So with this consortium, what I did was I did my very best to make sure that we had national innovation agencies from various Central and Eastern European countries, or if not the national innovation agencies, at least organizations that were national contact points in their countries. So that's what I managed to do. The proposal got a very nice score. To help just simply convey, about the geographic reach of our consortium, I went online. I think I can't remember the exact website, but you can find, with a bit of Google searching, you can find these maps which allow you to sort of color in individual countries and so forth. And this is quite a nice way to very quickly and prettily, if you like, convey, look, I have a consortium and they've got this nice geographic spread. Okay, that concludes what I wanted to say regarding sort of the initiation phase. Moving on now to talk about planning phase. So, as I said before, the planning phase is mainly concerned with proposal writing. So if you're going to be writing proposals, it means you're going to be needing to fill out application forms. On this rather busy slide, what I'm showing is, on the left, it's the standard application form document for research and innovation actions and innovation actions. The QR code in the top left-hand corner, that will take you directly to downloading that PDF. And that PDF gives you all the instructions for the part A and also the part B. Likewise, on the right-hand side, this is a standard application form for coordination support actions. And the QR code there will take you to that. What I want to emphasize is, be careful. These application forms, they get updated by the European Commission from time to time. Make sure you have the latest version. At least when I prepared this slide, the latest versions for both these applications forms seem to be April of last year. But the Commission could be changing these at any time, and certainly make sure, if you're doing a proposal, make absolute sure that you have the latest version, because it can be easy to be caught out and and quite frustrating sometimes if suddenly the Commission's introduced an extra section in Part B and you've overlooked that. So, or they changed the numbering order of the Part B. So, assuming you've got your application form document, the proposal, it breaks down into these two parts. There's the Part A and the Part B. In simple terms, the Part A, it's mainly about administrative information. The content here will be things about the general information about the proposal, title, acronym, abstracts. It'll be the area where you put in details about the participating organizations, such as their legal names, contact information, and roles. You'll have to tick various boxes about declarations and ethical considerations. And normally, I'm saying normally because it'll become clear a bit later, at least if it's a proposal dealing with reimbursements as opposed to lump sum funding, the part is where you'll be putting in the budgets for each of the individual partners for the proposal. In my next slides, I'm going to be mainly talking about the Part B, and after that also about the budget. Regarding the Part B, so yes, this is the sort of narrative component of the proposal. This is where you're going to have to explain how your proposal addresses things such as the scope, the expected outcomes, and so on and so forth from the call text. And the Part B mainly breaks down into these three sections: Section 1, excellence; Section 2, impact; Section 3, implementation. So I'm going to now talk more at length about these three different sections in the Part B. Or rather, sorry, before I get onto that, I'm going to explain this rather slightly overwhelming slide with rather a lot of color in it. So this slide, this is all in relation to the Part B, the technical proposal, which I said has got these three sections. What I'm trying to convey in this rather garish slide is, if you like, my preferred approach to structuring the proposal. So in this figure, you'll see, if you like, two columns. There's one column at the top where it says excellence, and then below objectives, and then there's this series of scientific and technological objectives. In the other column where it says 3, implementation, followed by work program, and then WP1, work package 1, and so on and so forth. In essence, what I'm trying to say is, with the proposals I write and what I try to encourage proposal writers to do, is to set up their proposal so that in Section 1, where you need to talk about the scientific and technical objectives, for each scientific and technical objective that you have, make that map to its respective work package and use essentially the same numbering. So if scientific and technological objective 1 should map to work package 1, scientific and technical objective 2 maps to work package 2, and so on and so forth. The work packages that deal with dissemination, exploitation, and communication and project management, I always put them at the very end. I know a lot of people, a lot of consortia put them right at the start, but I say no, stick them at the end, because it then allows you to have this nice mapping between the numbers of the objectives and the work packages. Now, these columns, this is, if you like, this is what I try to strive for, and to have appear in the proposal, because it makes life, I think it makes life easier for an evaluator to understand the structure of your project. It makes them easier to see, oh yes, okay, you've got these objectives and this is how you're going to do it. It's a very simple mapping. That's how I like to see the proposal, if you like, at the end. But getting to that point beforehand, in a way, it's almost in reverse. And this is where you've got these bright yellow sort of starry figures going around the side, sort of in anti-clockwise direction. So if we start with number 1 in the top right-hand corner, in the initiation phase of developing proposal, when I have this sort of meeting with the critical mass of consortium partners, during those discussions, usually what you find is naturally consortium partners say, well, I can do this, you can do that. Oh, your laboratory's got this equipment, etc., etc. This is fine. This is great. This is what you want to hear. In essence, they're talking about tasks that they can do. And through the discussions, you can start grouping those tasks together. In other words, you're starting to form what are going to be the work packages. And obviously, the partner that's saying, oh, I can do such and such, which the bulk of the task in this work package, they're the obvious person to do that work package. So it's great having those discussions. It's great sort of kind of identifying your work packages and ideally arranging them in some kind of chronological order. The next step, when I'm actually helping them to prepare the proposal, is I create an action item list. And I say, okay, work package leader 1, please, go away, prepare your work package. But in parallel, I want you to write half a page to a page on the objectives behind that work package. In other words, I want you to prepare the text and the figures for objective 1. So this is sort of, as I'm going through these sort of starry things, I've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4 even. And yeah, so dare I say, even around to number 5. So in parallel, I want these work package leaders to sort of do both work package description and their objective more or less in parallel to each other. And then things like, writing about the project dissemination, project management, that's usually on my shoulders. That's a fairly trivial activity to do. So anyway, this is a slide at a sort of rather abstract level. How does it look like perhaps in practice? This is from a real example. This is a project I had. It was a Marie Skłodowska-Curie. No, sorry to lie. It was a research and innovation action project called Phoebe that I had some years ago. So in essence, this is how we'd had a meeting, I think it was in Dresden, with a core of the partners. This was before COVID, so people were still sort of meeting in person. We had a really nice meeting. One professor was straight away at a blackboard starting to sketch out work package titles. That led to discussions about the objectives, and this is eventually what was formulated. I should say this is examples for research innovation actions and innovation action, but I actually take the same approach even when I'm doing coordination support actions. Okay, so I think I can skip this slide quickly because yes, I'm just saying, look, so now we're talking about section 1, scientific excellence. The point to make is each of the work package leaders, you should be telling them not only to do the work package description, but also to come up with half a page, 1 page, describing the objective. They should be describing in terms of what's the state of the art, how this new project proposal is going to go beyond the state of the art. They should have some nice references, ideally also be quoting some results they themselves or their institute has in the field. Going to a bit too fast. Okay. Also in this section, scientific excellence, you will typically the standard application form will say why are the objectives of your proposal, how they somehow pertinent, how are they relevant to the work program topic, the call text. What you see here, this is an example. This was a proposal some years ago which led to a project called Civis Home. This is a classic thing that consortia do. They create a simple table, 2 columns. In the first column, they copy and paste bits of text from the call text, from the expected outcomes, from the scope. They'll paste it in the 1 column, and then they'll try to briefly say in the right-hand column, look, this is how we're addressing it, or this is the part of the proposal where you need to go and look, this is where we're tackling with that. Apologies for going too fast through the slides. So also in scientific excellence, in the standard application form, typically it says things like, describe how your project goes beyond the state of the art and the extent of the proposed work is ambitious. Now, You'll work, you'll have, let's say, I get my work package leaders writing about the objectives. They're doing that in a, say, a qualitative way. But it's also good if you can help to convey the ambition of your project in quantitative terms. So what I asked the consortium to do is to say, look, for this particular technology or scientific field, what are the key indicators? What are the key scientific parameters, technological parameters that people are interested in? Where are we today? What's the state of the art? What are you hoping to achieve by the end of the project? In this simple table, this example here, this was a proposal and project that I had called Mnemosyne. It was all about developing something called computation in memory. And in their case, the consortium boiled it down to these three key parameters. These were what they felt were the most important ones in their particular field in which they could demonstrate the ambition of the project. So they were saying, for example, they would improve the energy delay product by a factor of 100-fold to 1,000-fold through the project. Next slide. Also in section 1, in the standard application form, you'll be asked to describe where the proposed work is positioned in terms of research and innovation maturity. Now, you remember a few slides earlier, we talked about technology readiness levels. In trying to address this particular requirement, I often create a sort of my own kind of technology readiness level table. And what you see here is part of an example. So this is from a real proposal, real project, the Mnemosyne, the one about computation in memory, CIM. So what was unusual with that call text was because it was a very early stage field of research, the commission said, look, we expect the TRL level to be, at the start of the project, TRL level 2, by the end, only TRL level 3. In other words, experimental proof of concept. We're not expecting you to go further and get a laboratory validated prototype because we know this is just such an early nascent field of research. So what did we do? So I had a very busy weekend before the deadline for this call, together with the coordinator, and we were basically sitting and in real time together. I was getting him to sort of, I was explaining what these TRL levels meant, and I said, look, in the context of our project, how can we verify that you've reached TRL level 2 in concrete terms? Likewise, how can you do it for TRL level 3? But I didn't stop there. I then said, look, we've got to go the extra mile here. I know our project's only 3 years. This is what we can do in the 3 years. But let's try to convey to the evaluators and the commission that we've got a vision beyond the project. We've got ambitions. This project is just one step in many, but we want to be involved in the grand scheme of things. So let's come along with a roadmap. Let's actually articulate how we think we could progress through the remaining TRL levels. Now, in this slide, you only see TRL level 4 and 5, but in the actual proposal, we went all the way down to TRL level 9. And this was something in the evaluation that the evaluators certainly liked. This is something you might want to consider for your own proposals. Still on scientific excellence. So another thing that standard application form will ask you, it'll say things like describe and explain the overall methodology, including the concepts, models and assumptions that underpin your work. Now, there's various ways and means of helping to explain your methodology. I'm just giving one example here. This was in this project, Phoebe, also relating to organic electronics and OLEDs. So from discussions with the partners, they define work packages. From my past experience in product development, not in this field, but in sort of automotive and before that in body scanning, I was kind of aware of the terminology phases, stages. So I took the liberty to sort of kind of group their work packages into different phases. and I sort of came up with a figure. It became evident to me that the first 3 work packages, modeling, synthesis, and characterization, that there was going to be a sort of iteration going on. They were going to spend the first year and a half modeling exotic organic materials, trying to synthesize them, characterize them, realize that what got produced didn't have the same characteristics as the models, so the models needed to be improved, and this was going to be repeating. So I did a figure like this. I also wrote a bit about, look, this is part of a product development process. And again, this is something that seemed to go down quite well with the evaluators. So if you're doing any proposal, research, innovation action is somehow you can map your work packages to the concept of some kind of product development process, and do some figure that usually goes down quite well. Also, scientific excellence. In the standard application form, there'll typically be some sentence saying, describe any national or international research and innovation activities. These results will feed into the project. This table here, this was actually from a proposal and project that's called an ERA chair. This is a funding scheme under Widening. It funds professorial positions and research with a small research group. The funding is up to €2.5 million for sort of 5 years. This particular proposal and project, it was for maritime cybersecurity, ERA chair at Tallinn University of Technology. I could spend forever explaining why it was a pleasure writing this proposal. But one of the things that became evident from when I was invited to help work with them was they had such a number of current or recent projects which would somehow contribute to this ERA chair. So I came up with a simple table. There were more rows, in fact, in the proposal, but I listed different projects, initiatives, when they were occurring, and then I said briefly, look, this is the link. This is how it's relevant to this ERA chair. This is something, this sort of simple type of table is something you might also want to think about for your own proposals, be it CSA or research and innovation action. Scientific excellence still, methodology. Standard application form talks about explaining how expertise and methods from different disciplines will be brought together. It's nice if you can come up with some kind of simple figures to help convey. These are just 2 sort of examples. Yeah, I think the one on the left, it was from a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action RISE project called MEGA, which I was involved with for many years. Those types of projects are all about mobility. What we did was we very broadly grouped the different people involved as being either scientists, material producers, or manufacturers. And that kind of gave us then an excuse to come up with a figure like this and to talk a bit about the main flows of mobility that were going on within the project. So we move on to talk about impacts. Section 2. So the impact section, in the standard application form, you'll be asked things like describe the unique contribution and project results towards topic outcomes. I often recommend, in terms of when they talk about topic outcomes, if it's research innovation action or innovation action, often there's some reference about creating an economic impact. As soon as I hear those kind of words, within the consortium, I start asking them, well, do you have any marketing studies? Do you have any marketing reports? This bit of text here, this figure, this was from the Mnemosina project about computation in memory. One of the partners was this well-known company, Arm, that designs chips in Cambridge. They had access to all manner of marketing literature. So I was able to draw upon that to sort of help build a bit of a case about, look, here's the market potential in this area. Our project, this is how it could fit in, and so forth. Impact 2. Yes, you have to see how your projects contribute to expected outcomes. Now, the previous slide, I talked about using some marketing studies, literature, and helping that to build a sort of qualitative case. Another approach to also perhaps balance and include in this section of impact is to think about the quantitative impacts in your project. So this table you see here, this is part of the table that appeared in the impact section for a twinning proposal. So the Quest project is a twinning project. This table here is for another twinning project, an earlier one called SUS-NANO. In the call text, there were maybe, I forget the number, 4 or 5 expected outcomes. I don't show them all here, but you see at least the first 2. So create a table, and then came up with a series of performance indicators. Because the project is a capacity building one with a little bit of scientific projects, I was able to draw upon the different activities and come up with a whole series of indicators and sort of say, look, got all these things going on. We're doing all this relevant activities and generating these results. And hey presto, this helps in some shape or form to contribute to outcome 1, outcome 2, and so on and so forth. I think these tables are, especially for coordination support actions under widening, these are pretty good things to have. So, sorry for skipping too quickly. Also in the section 2 impact, at some point, the standard application form, it asks you to talk about potential barriers and how your project can overcome them. Now, because I'm often writing proposals about topics where I'm clearly not the expert in the field, knowing about potential barriers is potentially a problem for me. What I do is oftentimes I look for these public-private partnerships that exist on a European level. In the past, they used to be called European technology platforms. Under Horizon Europe, they're now called European partnerships. These are public-private associations that the Commission helps to fund, and they'll be on different thematics: quantum technologies, antimicrobial resistance, and all different kinds of areas. The thing to do is to try to find out, is there some European partnership or European technology platform relevant to your particular proposal and thematic? If there is, good. Go and investigate their website and see if they have created what's called a strategic research agenda. On this slide here, you see these are examples. When I was doing that maritime cybersecurity proposal for TalTech, Tallinn University of Technology, I found this particular public-private partnership. I found this strategic research agenda. Within the agenda, they identify what are priorities, what the experts consider to be the priorities for research for the forthcoming 5-10 years or more. That itself is already really interesting. That has a big influence on the priorities that appear in the Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020 research programs. But also what you find in the strategic research agendas is usually there's some sections where they talk about the challenges in the particular field. And for me, in this sense, challenges is a synonym for barriers, for problems, for difficulties. So when I'm struggling to write section 2.1 about potential barriers, I go looking for the strategic research agendas. I look to see if there's a section talking about challenges, and that's often a very rich source of information which I can then draw upon and include in my proposal in this section. Impacts still. There's a section 2.2 in the standard application form where you have to write about dissemination, exploitation, and communication. This figure I'm showing you here, I literally copied and pasted this from the European Commission. This figure just helps us sort of clarify what are the differences between these 3 different activities. For me, exploitation is always pretty clear in my mind, but I have to be reminded from time to time what's the distinction between dissemination and communication, and this figure certainly helps to do that for me. Still on the topic of dissemination, communication, exploitation, in this section of the proposal, a classic thing to do is to have some kind of table where you summarize all the different dissemination, communication, exploitation measures that you'll have in your project. You identify who the target audiences are for those, and what are your key performance indicators, what are your targets during the course of the project. This table you see here, this is an example. This is a very condensed, brief one, if you like. That's because it was in a Pathfinder open proposal that I did that led to a project. With those Pathfinder open proposals, you have a very, very strict and short page limit of about, I think it's 20 pages or 17 pages. Whatever the precise number is, it's really, really tough to squeeze all the relevant information in. So this was the table that I had. I think I've used a similar table also in twinning proposals. If you do such a table, they're great to have. The one thing I would suggest is that you also write some text just to elaborate a bit more and describe a bit more what are these different target audience categories. So, write a few sentences describing what you mean by industry. Who are the actual companies that you'll be trying to reach? EU initiatives. What are these precise EU initiatives? Give some specifics. Section still on impacts. Another thing you'll be asked to describe. You'll be asked to describe to outline the strategy that you have to manage intellectual property. Here, what I do, and this is a real example in this table, is I create a simple table with these sort of 3 columns: expected foreground knowledge, lead partner concerned, other partners claiming ownership rights. And during the proposal preparation process, I tell the partners, okay, what innovations, what foreground knowledge, what new things are you anticipating, expecting to create during the course of this project? Please put it down in this table. Please identify yourself as being, say, the lead partner concerned. We'll create a consolidated table with all the contributions from the partners, and then we'll circulate it amongst all the consulting partners so that everybody sees what everybody else has written. And then if another partner feels they have some kind of role or contribution to that particular innovation or foreground knowledge, they can put it in the relevant column. It so happened with this particular proposal, this was for the Mnemosyne, the computation in memory, and the partners sort of took it upon themselves to actually further break it down according to work packages. I mean, this is not a must, but it's something you can also do. The good thing about this is the kind of table that if you win a project, when you create your consortium agreement, you're going to have something like this kind of information captured in your consortium agreement. But if you already have this in your proposal, you're just showing to the evaluators and the commission that you're thinking one step ahead. You're that much more prepared. So having this kind of table is definitely something I recommend for research and innovation actions. And in fact, even with twinning proposals, because twinning projects these days, although they're coordination support actions, there's usually one work package where you can do some research. I get the partners also to still come up with a table like this. And then I say, look, this is the preliminary vision we have for foreground knowledge and access to it. Lastly on impacts. Impacts, Lord. And by the way, I mean, if you didn't realize already before, impact section is usually the one that the section the scientists like least to write. So it's usually the one where the proposal writer has to get the most involved in. Anyway, finally at the end of this section, the standard application form, the commission have come up with what they call a canvas. They want you to create a canvas showing the key elements of the project's impact pathways and measures to maximize its impact. So this sort of figure table that you see on the right, look, this is actually from the Quest proposal. All the titles at the tops, so specific needs, expected results, D&E and C measures, target groups, outcomes, impacts. This is from this canvas that the Commission wants us to complete. What is different, what they don't provide, is they don't really say, look, this is the precise information that you should put into it. All the text, in the case of Quest, I recognized that there were, I tried to boil down the specific needs to as few as possible. So I said, look, on the one hand, twinning, it's a capacity building activity. It's clearly of benefit to ELTA. We had what's called a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. I said, look, all the needs have been identified there. But because this Quest project is also dealing with quantum reservoir computing and quantum technologies, I said, look, there's also, it's not only a need at the level of ELTA, at this European level. Lo and behold, in the strategic research agenda on quantum technologies, it's been identified that there's a need for quantum technologies. And look, this project will also have some contributions towards that. So that's how we kind of came up with the needs. And for many of the other sections, because of page limits, there was only like 32 pages for the whole of this proposal. I couldn't really afford to elaborate in great detail about expected results. And besides, they've been written about in other sections of the proposal. So I just made these references saying, look, basically go and see key performance indicators for objectives 1, 2, and 3, and 5 in section 1.1, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, this is something you might want to think about if you're doing, say, widening proposals for teaming or for some of the other widening calls. Okay, moving on, section 3. So about implementation. In this section, you'll need to come up with what's called a PERT diagram. This is an example from a project that's currently running called QRC for ESP, dealing with quantum reservoir computing. What can I say about PERT diagrams? I tend to go with the approach of having a very, very simple figure. I know that this sort of figure doesn't, with the PERT diagram, you're supposed to capture all the different information flows, task activities going on between work packages. I know that in real life, the project's a lot more complicated than this, but I have a feeling that if you allow too much complexity to appear in a proposal, it's probably going to kill the proposal. That the evaluators are going to lose the thread, lose the simple narrative of the story of your proposal. So as much as possible, I try to come up with PERT diagrams, which are very simplistic. So in the case of this one, which is a research and innovation action, it was clear work package 1 is sort of the theory and models. That's early on in the project. That information is feeding into the development of these 2 different types of quantum reservoir, superconducting and defect-based. And at some stage in the project, hopefully those are sufficiently developed that they can be integrated and demonstrated with some very fancy neural network. And then, hey presto, running in parallel throughout the project, we've got project management and dissemination, and they appear either side of the figure. Also in implementation, you're going to have to do your work package leaders. They're going to have to write their work package descriptions. Now, what you see here, this is actually an example from Horizon 2020 proposal. Things are slightly changed in Horizon Europe, but I think the point I want to get across is the same for whether it's Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe. The point I want to make is what I always stress with the work package leaders is, look, for every every main task that you are going to describe in this work package, map to it what the objective is. And in fact, if you sort of strip it down to the basics, in fact, the title for your objective can basically be the title for the task, because, in a sense, I say to myself, well, why wouldn't it be? You're saying to yourself, you've got this objective and you've got to do it. Well, you better get on with it. You get on with the task. So anyway, so I have this simplistic approach. Each objective maps to its own task. One of the other things I notice is and it's understandable, for people who are not native English speakers, it's difficult writing this kind of text. And you can fall into the trap of using a language sounds a little bit too passive. So I say to people, when you're writing these objectives, these tasks, with the verbs, try to use the imperative form. So the imperative form is a bit like when you're giving orders. Clean the floor, close the curtains, put your clothes on. Sorry, I'm sounding like a father or whatever, but the point I'm trying to make is, you use the imperative form, this sort of almost ordering form, because it sounds more active. It's a subtle thing, but it gives the impression that that you want to do things. If there's too much text which is in this sort of rather passive form, it just takes a little bit the edge off the text. So anyway, that's something I recommend. The other thing is deliverables. So work packages. My recommendation is it's Goldilocks, isn't it? Again, not too many, not too few. At the very least, I'd say each work package should have 2 deliverables. You want to make sure at least that if a project, for whatever number of periods a project has, and typically there are 2 periods, you want to make sure there's at least 1 deliverable for each period, and probably a few more. And these deliverables to be sort of spread out over the course of the project. Work package, so section 3 implementation, work plan timing. So this is an example of a sort of Gantt chart, an overall timing for the project. This was from a real proposal on projects. To be honest, we probably got a bit carried away with our deliverables and milestones. In this figure, the deliverables were marked with red and the milestones in green. We probably got a little bit carried away, but I guess the point to make is make sure there is a spread over the whole duration of the project. What I tend to find is, especially for research and innovation actions, is it's very easy for the scientists to stack up all the deliverables at the end of the project and not have a balance of them earlier on during period 1. And this is something that's easy to be criticized about. Section 3 implementation, you also get asked to identify critical risks. This is a table, this is an example from the Quest proposal project. The main points I would say, recommendations I would make here is, I would say, for each of your work package leaders, at the same time as you ask them to write their work package description and to write the text for their objective that goes in section 1, you should also say to them, look, you need to identify at least 2 specific risks relating to your work package. Not only identify the risks, but also identify specific mitigation measures that can be taken to address them. As I say, at least 2. By doing that, that will help you to come up with this table. At the same time as you challenge them to come up with these risks and these mitigations, you need to tell them, look, make an assessment, an estimate of the likelihood for your risk and the severity. Of course, it's just an estimate, and it's a qualitative measure, low, medium, high, similarly for severity. But if you do this, and as I say, if you have at least, say, 2 risks for each work package, you'll probably be in a good place for your proposal. Also in implementation, you're going to have to talk about the efforts and budget. What I recommend here for all proposals, CSA, research innovation actions, is to generate some pie charts to give a sort of summary of your budgets and your efforts. So if you look at these 3 pie charts, the first one, it's covering the efforts, in other words, the person months of the work packages. The key points perhaps to convey here are, firstly, the work package dealing with project management. It's never written anywhere, but it's a sort of generally understood rule that the number of person months for project management should lie somewhere typically between 5 to 7% of the overall number for your project. If you do that, you'll be in a good place and you won't normally be criticized. Similarly, the work package for dissemination, as a very general rule, I would say, is keep, unless it's a CSA which is really very, very focused on dissemination. I think for all other types of projects, I would say keep it within 10% of the overall person months for the project. Then for all the other work packages dealing with scientific and technical objectives and their achievement, I'm not saying you have to have an even distribution of person months. You don't, because clearly certain work packages might require far more than others. But the key thing to do is, if when you look at the pie chart, it becomes evident, for example, in this case, work package 3 has 30%, is somewhat more than some of the others. You'd want to write some words to explain why that's the case. Why is that more than the others? And I see here with work package 2 and work package 3, which was slightly more, we said, look, it's because there's a lot of laboratory work that's got to go on. With the pie chart in the middle, here we sort of did a split between showing the amount of person months for the academic partners versus the private partners. Here, I think this is really important for research and innovation actions and innovation actions. With research and innovation actions, you can probably get away with having a majority of the person months for the academic partners, because you can say, look, it's early stage research. This is being predominantly done by the academic partners. On the other hand, if it's an innovation action, as a general rule, I'd probably say, look, you probably want half, or certainly close to half, of the person months being done by the companies, by the private partners. You certainly want to make sure that they have a significant contribution. In this case, the project was a research and innovation action. It's very early stage, so that's how we could justify it. And then lastly, in the last figure, pie chart, budget distribution. Yeah, usually the bulk of costs are going to personnel. If you've got travel costs, I would say, if they end up being more than, say, 10% of the overall budget, then make sure you give a bit of a justification, a bit of an explanation why. If you've got any subcontracting, I could go on for ages, but the commission and the evaluators tend to be a little bit allergic about subcontracting. As a general rule, I would say keep it to as little as possible. And even if you've only got like 1, 2, 3% of subcontracting, make sure you have a bullet point or two explaining why it's necessary. Next slide. Sorry. Last slide about implementation. So the very last section, 3.2 in your part B, you're asked to describe the capacity of the participants and consortium as a whole. The classic thing that I do is I take those scientific and technical objectives that we described in section 1 and take the titles, stick them in the table, and then I just systematically go through saying, look, this is the capacity, this is the competence, this is the equipment, the facilities that various partners has, which means they're more than capable of achieving the objective. So that's been talking at length about, considerable length about part B. Sorry the time is taking so long, but I move on now to talk about resource allocation. So look, resource allocation, it's mainly about budgets. In the context of budget, we have what are called lump sum funding, and we have reimbursement of actual costs. Lump sum funding is something that was introduced in pilot schemes towards the end of Horizon 2020. Now that as we progress more and more into Horizon Europe, it's becoming more and more the standard way of funding projects. Nevertheless, if you like, the old way, the reimbursement approach still exists. So what do these two terms mean? Well, look, the lump sum grants, these means that the budget that you have is defined according to each work package in your grant proposal and is fixed at the grant agreement stage. These funds are triggered upon the completion of the activities, the tasks, and the work packages. The payment of the lump sums follows the usual EC payment schedule. In other words, you have pre-financing, interim, typically, and final payment. Sometimes you only have the pre-financing, the final payment. On the other hand, reimbursement grants, the old style, which to some extent still exists, certainly for Pathfinder Open project that I have, here the costs are defined according to eligible costs for personnel, travel, equipment, so forth. The funds are triggered upon the submission of financial statements showing actual costs for period 1, period 2. Similar to lump sum, the payment of reimbursement grants follows the regular EC payment schedule, pre-financing, interim, final payment. So, some few words more about the definitions of some of these cost terms. So personnel costs, we talk about actual costs. Actual costs in terms of personnel costs, this will be the gross monthly salary that an employee has, plus the employer's contribution to Social Security and pension. It could be unit costs. Some beneficiaries, some organizations, they calculate average rates for their staff as part of their annual cost accounting system. And then there's a third category, SME owners, small to medium-sized enterprises, where the owners don't pay themselves a salary, they receive dividends. And in this case, there's a special sort of formula that's been worked out for calculating how much their monthly personnel costs are. Subcontracting costs, yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, the commission and evaluators are somehow allergic to subcontracting costs, so be very careful if you include them, and certainly try to avoid having substantial subcontracting costs. If you have any subcontracting costs, make sure you fill in the relevant table 3.1G and give good justification as to why. Also be careful, make sure that what you're declaring as a subcontracting cost really is subcontracting as opposed to a purchase cost. I'll give you an example. So with this reimbursement grants, in the past, if you go back several framework programs, at the end of the project, for the financial statements, it was necessary to get an accounting firm to issue an audit certificate, in essence, to audit the costs on the project. This cost of getting an accounting firm to do that was classed by the Commission as a subcontracting cost. And we'd have to integrate that in the budget, in the proposal, in the project. That was certainly the case in what was called the 7th Framework Programme. When we then went to Horizon 2020, which is the framework programme before the current one, suddenly the Commission decided, no, it's no longer subcontracting costs. We're just going to say this is a regular purchasing cost. Why did they do that? I would guess because there is this sort of allergic reaction to seeing subcontracting costs. On the other hand, it was evident with this reimbursement funding, you had to contract an accountancy firm, so it was a necessary cost. So it was as it was. Cost definitions, other types of costs, purchase costs. So in all these projects, besides personnel costs, you're probably going to have, for sure, travel costs to go to consortium meetings, perhaps to go to conferences. You may be buying equipment, you may have research consumables. To make life easier, the Commission has said, look, if those purchase costs, if they're below 15% of the personnel costs, we don't want to know. We don't want to be burden based. We don't want to burden you. We don't really want to burden ourselves with all the reporting on that. So just don't worry about it. On the other hand, if it exceeds 15%, then yes, please, we want you to give a breakdown. So this is something to remember. Certainly, as under purchase costs, you have travel and subsistence costs. If you're dealing with, for example, twinning projects like Quest, where by the name, it's a twinning project. It involves twinning exchanges between partners, and therefore high comparative travel costs. Here, you really got to go to town explaining and really giving a breakdown of how you calculated your costs. So what you see here, this bit of table here, this really went down into detail about how we calculate the costs for exchanges of early stage researchers and experienced researchers and administrative staff. And this is something that the Commission, the evaluators, certainly seem to like, certainly seem to expect. Under purchase costs, you have equipment. And the key thing to remember here is if you're going to buy equipment, the actual cost that is eligible that can be booked to the project is not the whole cost of the equipment, but the depreciation. So this then gets rather complicated at times. It gets into national rules of accounting for the depreciation of equipment. Long story short, in one country, such as Albania, maybe laboratory equipment is depreciated over a 10-year period. On the other hand, in another country, maybe it's depreciated over 5 years or 20 years. Whatever the national rules are, that's the depreciation rate you need to use. But you also need to take into account what's the utilization of that laboratory equipment. Is it being used 100% exclusively for the project? If it's not, that's another factor you need to consider when calculating the depreciation that you're going to book and give as a cost to the project. Other costs that might come under purchasing costs, things like research consumables. If that's the case, make sure you itemize them, give a breakdown. Other classic costs, especially in coordination support actions, would be things like catering for workshops, conferences, this kind of stuff. Done that. Then lastly, other cost categories, if they're internally voiced goods and services, if that's the case, there's a special table 3.1i that you need to fill out. We move on now to lump sum funding. So as mentioned before, lump sum funding is increasing the approach used in Horizon Europe. Certainly for the Quest project is what we had to do. My advice, there's a website the Commission has where they have a nice training video all about this. The QR code here on the left that will take you to that. It will also help you access, there's a specific Excel budget tool that the Commission requires that you use, that you have to fill out with all your budget details, which you eventually have to upload to the European Commission's portal if you're preparing a proposal for a lump sum funded call. So I won't go into all the details about this Excel budget tool other than to say, look, here's this QR code. If you use that, that will enable you to download the Excel budget tool. Make sure that you're using, as with all these application forms and work programs, make sure you've got the latest version that you're using for your proposal. Once you fill this thing out, this is something you have to upload to the portal as part of your proposal submission. A lesser well-known thing, but a good thing to know about if you're doing a lump sum funding proposal, this QR code here on the left, if you go there, it'll take you to what's called the Horizon dashboard for lump sum evaluations. Now, this is a specific website, web page, where you can find information about person month rates for different organizations, for different countries. So this particular website, this dashboard, it was set up for experts who have to evaluate the proposals and have to evaluate the lump sum budgets. And it's there so that they can understand what are typical personnel costs for different organizations in different countries. Now, the example that you see actually on screen is I've gone to this dashboard and I've said, look, I want to know about Luxembourg and private companies without SMEs. And it comes up with this figure. It shows you sort of what's the 20th percentile rate for salaries and the 80th percentile rate. So in essence, if you're a project coordinator preparing a proposal, this dashboard is a good way for you to screen the person month rates that you'll get from your partners. It's a good way to screen them, to check them, to know, are they within the normal range? Now, if they're not in the normal range, that's not to say that you don't go back to the partner and say, forget it, you're way too high. Of course not. But you do need to be aware that they are outside the normal range. And therefore, you should give a short description, justification somewhere in the proposal as to why that partner has that higher rate. Classic justifications would be, if it's a university and they've got high rates, it's probably because they're involving more senior, experienced staff. That could be one reason. On the other hand, if it's, say, a private company, especially if it's a project dealing with ICT, you might say something like, well, look, they're higher rates because the standard salary rates for this type of employment, this type of IT job are high. They're very much in demand. They're higher than if you compare to other industries, yes, they're high, but that's just the way it is. This is what the market says. So lastly, if you've done a lump sum funding and you have a budget, eventually in your proposal or in your grant agreement, this is sort of how it will look like. So yes, you have literally a lump sum for each work package for each partner. In this project Quest, we've got 9 work packages. If we take the example of work package 1, provided each partner involved in that, provided they complete their tasks, they're eligible for that budget. They don't have to show their costs for that work package. They just have to make sure they've done everything they were supposed to do. Moving on to about the other type of funding, the old style reimbursement of actual costs. So here the Commission never ever, as far as I'm aware, issued a sort of Excel budget tool. It'd always been down to the coordinator of the consortium to come up with their own sort of Excel file. And from my years of experience, I've seen some Excel files which have been very basic and some more sophisticated. The example you see here on the screen is a basic one. This is actually one that I would use. I say basic because whenever I've developed proposals, I've tended to say to partners, please give me an average person month rate for your staff. I don't want to know the rate for each individual expert. That's getting too detailed and complicated, if you like. Just give me an average rate. That's one thing I do. The other thing is for other direct costs, consumables, I'll tell them to give me an overall figure. If it's above this sort of 15%, I'll then sort of say, look, please give me an itemized breakdown for your consumables. And then things like for travel, again, as a very, very rough rule, if I'm doing research and innovation action for, say, 3 years, this sort of duration, I've tended to allow partners travel budgets of the order of 25,000 euros plus or minus to enable them to not only go to consortium meetings, but also to go to conferences and workshops. If it's a consortium, I tend to see a spectrum. I see some partners, sometimes you get partners who totally underestimate this, and then you get some partners who completely overestimate. So I allow myself the liberty, the authority to make some adjustments and then sort of explain, look, partners, in my experience, this should be enough, or you're too low here. So if you have a proposal and project which is dealing with reimbursement of actual costs, this is what a sort of summary table will look like. This is the one that we have for the QRC for ESP project. And you see, look, yeah, there's a whole breakdown of personnel costs, purchase costs for travel, equipment, other goods, and for each and every partner. And with this project, it's incumbent upon us to do financial statements. In fact, we're just at the end of period 1 and we're just submitting our financial statements. So partners will have to say precisely how many personnel costs they have at this stage, how much travel costs, and so forth, in order to claim the grants. Some words about proposal submission. Make sure you're signed into the EU's portal. The QR code on the left takes you to this particular page. So let's imagine the case that you're actually a coordinator and you're wishing to register and submit to the call Teaming for Excellence. So this is a call under widening. You'll need to go onto the Funding and Tenders portal. You'll need to search for that call. Assuming you find the heading for the call, there will be a hypertext link. You should click on that. And then in the subsequent page, there'll be a long page with information about the topic description, mission, destination, so on and so forth. But right near the bottom, there'll be a section where it says Start Submission. And assuming you're the coordinator, I mean, what I'm describing, you don't do, if you're just a consortium partner, a junior consortium partner, you're not the one who does the registration. It's just the coordinator. The coordinator, they will click on this Start Submission button. That will take them into further sections where they'll have to provide things like the PIC, the Participant Identification Code for their organization. They'll then have to go on over the following days and weeks and to enter administrative data for the consortium partners for the Part B. They'll need to upload the PDF file containing the Part B technical proposal, budget data. When they think everything is all ready, the coordinator will need to run, there's like an online proposal validation check. There's a button you can press there that will check for the most obvious and glaring errors that you might have. Assuming the validation check goes okay, you can press the submit button and your proposal is submitted. Once it's submitted, that's not necessarily the end of the story. Up until the actual deadline, the call, and the call deadlines are usually 5 o'clock Brussels time on whatever day, you can keep submitting further versions of your proposal. So for example, my experience, I always like to make sure I've got a version submitted at least several days before the deadline. What I really don't like to do is to say wait until the final day before submitting a version, because on the deadline day, especially in the last few hours, you'll have literally thousands of people on the portal, and the whole system starts to grind to a halt, and it can be very, very nerve-wracking. So my advice is make sure you get a version submitted at least a few days beforehand. Then in the last few days, you can go back and look at your Part B together with your partners and, do checks for typing errors, further refinements on bits of text, what have you. Create a new version of the Part B, upload that, and submit it. So right up to the deadline, you can keep submitting improved versions. Yeah. Whatever is the last version that was submitted, that will be the version that gets evaluated. Which takes us to proposal evaluation. So look, when you've submitted the proposal, the deadline's passed, the commission has some automatic checks. I believe they're automated or semi-automated that check for admissibility and eligibility checks. There's certain basic things that they check that your proposal fulfills. Assuming it passes those, your proposal then is sent out to individual evaluators. Typically there'll be at least three. Sometimes if it's a really important call, there may be 4 or even more evaluators, but 3 is the usual number. They'll assess your proposal on 3 criteria. 1 criteria for each section of the Part B. So it'll be excellence, impact, implementation. And the scoring that they will assign is up to a maximum of 5 for each of those criterion. So the overall score, the perfect score would be 50. They have what they call scoring thresholds. You have to read carefully the call text, but typically they say the threshold is at least 3 out of 5 for each criterion and a score of 10 out of 15 for the overall score. That's usually the case. The evaluators, so these 3 evaluators, they will evaluate, they'll do this scoring. They'll have then some kind of what they call rapport meeting. One of the 3 will be the rapporteur. She or he will have to sort of look across the marks and they'll have to come up with some kind of consensus for each of the 3 marks. I mean, this is necessary if there's a wide disparity between the markings of the different evaluators. Also, the rapporteur will have these evaluators, they not only do scorings, but they'll also have to write some qualitative assessment, highlighting the strengths and weaknesses for each of the different sections. This rapporteur, she or he, will have to come up with a summary report where they extract the most pertinent, the most relevant qualitative comments and indicate what the consensus marks are for the 3 criteria. This evaluation report, once the whole evaluation process is complete, it gets sent out to all of the coordinators. Whether you have done a good proposal or bad proposal, we all get these evaluation summary reports, and they'll be typically sort of 2 to 4 pages in length. Now, of course, the next question people want to know is, well, have I got funding? How does the funding work? The fact that if I got a proposal that exceeds all these thresholds, does that mean I get funded? Well, sadly, the answer is not necessarily, and probably not. What the Commission does is, with all these proposals, all the proposals that have exceeded the thresholds, scoring thresholds, they'll rank them. So the proposal with the highest overall score will be at the top, running down to the last proposal with the lowest marks still exceeding the scoring thresholds. So they'll have this ranking list, and then they'll go, okay, well, we've got a certain budget, 12 million, 40 million, whatever it is, and they start basically giving out the money starting from the top, and they carry on until they run out. So what this means in practice is virtually it's almost never enough just to pass the threshold. I mean, there's not some exact figure where you can say, look, if you get this score, you're going to get funded, unless, of course, say it's perhaps 15. But after years and years of experience, what have I observed? Well, for the scoring criterion dealing with excellence, my experience is that unless you get at least 4.5 out of 5 or better, you're unlikely to get funded. I struggle personally to recall occasions where I've had a proposal that's been funded where I've had less than 4.5. That's one thing. Then for the overall score, I would say, and this is a very general rule, there's always exceptions, but you need to be aiming for at least 13.5 or better. Yeah, I mean, frankly speaking, aim for 15, you're probably going to fall short. But if you're getting 14 or better, then you're probably going to get funded. This whole process, from how long does it take? Well, from the actual deadline of submitting your proposal, you're probably going to take 4 to 5 months before you get your evaluation summary reports. So let's assume you're one of the lucky ones. You were very close to the top of the ranking, or you're top of the ranking. You've been invited for contract negotiations. What does that mean? So it means you'll get an official notification, or the coordinator will get an official invite to contract negotiations. During this process of contract negotiations, the consortium partners, they'll have to provide legal, financial, and administrative details. There'll have to be work done on the budget work plan finalization. So usually not really the budget, it's more the, well, it depends. Usually it's more the part B. So in the evaluation summary reports, even when you get a very high mark, usually there'll be some criticisms, there'll be some weaknesses that evaluators have pointed out. And the commission will say something like, we invite you to address these weaknesses. Basically what that means is you need to go away and write some extra text tackling, mitigating the weaknesses that have been pointed out. Now, the only thing is, when you're doing this, the European Commission can be quite pedantic in this finalization process, and they really want the I's dotted, the T's crossed. So when you're doing these improvements to the Part B during this process, quite often it's iterative. You go away, you think you've written the right text, and then you submit it in, and then lo and behold, you get told, oh, you need to make some further writing, some further improvements on another section. This is often because within the commission, there's different experts who will look at your proposal. There'll be, say, the project advisor, there'll be financial officers, and then there'll be legal officers. And each will probably have their own take, their own particular things that they want clarified. So with that all said, this grant agreement preparation process, it often takes at least 3 months to complete. And I say to people, look, if writing the proposal itself felt like a marathon, if you win and you get selected for funding, be prepared mentally that this will be at least like a semi-marathon. This negotiation, it's not a sprint. It's probably going to take months. It might at times be a little bit painful because of the pedantic details that the commission will require you to add and enter. Last sort of slide, and I apologize it's taken so long, this presentation, but the last thing you really need to think about if you want a project is what's called the consortium agreement. So the consortium agreement is an agreement just amongst the consortium partners. It doesn't involve the commission. The purpose of it is to identify internal collaboration rules, rights, responsibilities among consortium partners. It's mandatory for multi-beneficiary projects. I would say for all Horizon Europe projects, except for ones where it's a mono-applicant project, like a ERA-Chair project, for example, which are rather rare. Any projects where there's multiple partners, it's sort of de facto, it's required by the Commission that you have a consortium agreement. And in the consortium agreements, it will cover things like governance structure, financial management, IP, liability, conflict resolution, publication, dissemination rules. Timing, the Commission stipulate that the consortium agreement is concluded and signed before the grant agreement is signed between the project coordinator and the European Commission. Now, yeah, this is what the Commission stipulates. They don't necessarily police. So but they can do. So anyway, long story short, it's actually in your interest to get the consortium agreement sorted out and signed before the grant agreement. Some pragmatic tips in this regard. For the consortium agreement, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are established templates for this. The most well-known, most popular one is called the DESCAR model. The QR code in the bottom right will take you directly to the website where you can get that. This is the standard consortium agreement used by the vast majority of Horizon Europe projects. It clarifies all these financial and legal responsibilities. When you're preparing it, or your administrative people are preparing it, you need to, of course, involve the administrations and the other partners. This can be at times a little bit time consuming because of the reviews they need to do. What I would suggest is, if you're the coordinator, if you're leading the consortium agreement process, make sure in your emails that you're sending out to partners that you indicate deadlines, say 1 week or 2 weeks at most, at which you expect responses from the partners. You might also say to them, look, please don't modify articles in the agreement unless it's absolutely essential and it's also to the benefit of all the consortium partners. The reason why I say this is because it's very easy. Things can end up being a bit tit for tat. You know, one partner's administration wants to change this to fit their purposes. That incites another one to change this, that, and you end up, if you're not careful, you can have a bit of a polemic around it. And sometimes it can be easy to lose sight a bit. And in reality, for the vast majority, at least my experience, the vast majority of these projects, overall, they tend to run smoothly. If the projects, if the coordinators and the partners are really having to refer to the consortium agreement, then it's because there's some kind of conflict, and things shouldn't really be allowed to even get to that stage. You know, hopefully the relations that partners have are such that any misunderstandings can be resolved without having to go to some formal process. So, wow. I apologize for that long presentation. I hope, I'm sure quite a few of you probably lost concentration an hour or more ago. What I will say is this is all being recorded. I hope there's content in there for whether you're a complete beginner or you're a pretty experienced proposal writer. I hope that with some of the content, some of the slides I'm showing, I've given some ideas. If you have any kind of mental blocks at some point in writing some certain section or dealing with some aspect of the proposal, I hope I've conveyed some new ideas, some new types of figures, some new types of tables that can help to improve the quality of your own proposals. Now, with that all said, as with the last module, I'm setting homeworks. For those of you who would like to get a nice certificate of project management, EU project management, I'm setting homeworks after each module. So for this module's homework, this is all about lump sum budget. So I feel it's good to get your, metaphorically speaking, it's good to get your hands dirty. It's good for you to download this European Commission's Excel budget tool for lump sum. And it's good for you to have a bit of a play and see how it works, how it's a bit clunky and clumsy, but try it out. So what I would suggest is the following. For those of you who already did the first homework under the first module, where you had your own case study and you created your own project charter, if you want to, go and create a sort of fictional budget, lump sum budget for your case study, for your project charter. No restrictions on how many partners you have, what budget you choose. It's all there for you to sort of figure out yourself, justify yourself. to try out. Failing that, if you don't feel so comfortable to sort of create a lump sum budget for your case study, here's one that I would propose. So I'm not going to say it's about a particular field of science and technology. It's a very, very generic scientific project here. But I would say if you can't create your own case study, then use the following. Imagine you have a consortium with 5 partners, partner 1, partner 2, through to partner 5. For the personnel monthly costs, for partner 1, assume they're Hungarian and they're public organisation. Partner 2, assume they're German and public, so on and so forth for the other partners listed here. Notice that the last 2 partners, partner 4 and partner 5, are private companies. Now, we talked about this Horizon dashboard for lump sum evaluations. You're going to need to go and have a look at that and choose salaries for these 5 partners that fall, say, in the sweet spot between the 20th and 80th percentile. Or if for some reason you decide to choose a personnel month that's outside those percentiles, write a little justification as to why. For the total person months, for partner 1, assume it's 72 months, partner 2, 108 months, and so on and so forth. In this budget tool, you're going to have to specify work packages, because remember, it's a lump sum for each work package. So here I'm saying, look, assume there's 5 work packages with these titles: work package 1 research, work package 2 characterization, so on and so forth. I leave it to you to decide how you distribute the person months across the work packages. You've got these totals like partner 1 72, but it's up to you to decide how you distribute them across the work packages. The only thing I would say is, earlier in one of my slides, I gave some recommendations about the percentage of person months to allocate to dissemination. I think I said keep it below 10%. And also I gave some recommendations about work package 5 project management. I said, look, keep it to between 5 to 7%. So please make sure you respect that. Then there's some details here about travel costs for different partners, and some figures for research consumables, and one equipment cost. I said that there's one partner who's got some depreciation costs. So to go ahead and use those. So have a go at that. If you never use the Excel budget tool, it will be probably a little bit challenging, but it's good experience. It will definitely stand you in good stead. What you'll be doing is very much real life, so to speak, because this is exactly the Excel budget tool that's used in these proposals. I would say the deadline for the homework will be 7th of March. If you've got any questions or queries, if you're struggling, don't hesitate to email me. Otherwise, if it all goes very, very smoothly, once you've done it, email me your Excel budget tool and I will review it and give you some feedback.